Eric Lee Smith's The Civil War and Mark Herman's For the People are two classic games about the American Civil War. One is an older classic, one is a modern classic, but they're both very well respected games that and embark on the very ambitious task of trying to capture all of the military and economic and political complexity of the American Civil War to give you a strategic representation of the entire event. Very tough things. And they do it in fairly different ways. This is an X encounter traditional game. This is a point-to-point game. A game on a point-to-point map with a card-driven engine. They're very different from one another. How likely would it be that the two of them came together and were produced almost as if, I don't know, Han Solo and Princess Leia came together and had a son or a daughter? And yet this has happened, and the result is the U.S. Civil War by Mark Simonich. A big game, as you can see, comes in a really thick box, and by the admission of the design, admission almost seems to imply a sense of guilt. By a declaration, a proclamation, a statement of the designer himself. This is a game that, in fact, has been inspired by both the Civil War and For the People. And even at the first glance, you can see that the map truly is reminiscent of Eric Lee Smith's American Civil War. X Encounter covers the entire theater. The counters also are very similar to the ones of the Civil War. But you have also cards that is more reminiscent of For the People. New game, a game like this, you know it the second you see it. This is gonna be an instant classic or a big disappointment, because clearly it is an ambitious game design-wise, because of the scope of the events portrayed, the complexity of the conflict that is at the core of the design. Component-wise, you know, this has been a big commitment by the publisher GMT, so very exciting. What is this going to be? A big triumph? A disaster? Let's see. Let's take a closer look. Let me show you how the game works, and then we'll come back here for some conclusions. Oh gosh, I feel like they should have sent this map to a poet, and maybe a poet would be able to properly praise it. This is a beautiful map, not just in the sense like you could frame it and put it on the wall, which I think you probably almost could. There's a certain functional beauty, the beauty of functionality, meaning you look at this map and you get excited because you see that it covers all areas where it could possibly, where something related to the ACW may possibly happen. There is a lot of interesting stuff. Your brains start teeming with possibilities and ideas. The map, just to speak more in general terms, is actually made of two maps, but I should say it's an old habit of calling them map boards. These are two boards. Finally, hooray! This is what makes the box pretty big. Not that the game is a monster game, like with a bazillion components, but simply because it has these two beautiful boards that go together to create this wonderful field of possibilities. The map is divided in three main areas in terms of gameplay. One is the Trans-Mississippi, one is the west that runs around here, and one, of course, is the east. Let's take a closer look now so we can talk about gameplay. The map is divided in axes, as you can see, and as I was saying, it's both pleasant looking and extremely functional, extremely easy to use and to read, and yet, since you'll be staring at it for hours and hours when you play the game, it is definitely one that you won't get tired to look at. Now, basic concepts in the game. Military units in this game are represented by these generic strength points, and all that matters really is the color to indicate the side and the number. You can give change and divide the groups and put them together any way you want. That is, this group can be transformed into two. One group, they can be gathered and put together in a single one. You can simply split and put together, combine units numerically. Units, however, that is stacks of strength points, need leaders, and you have specific counters that represent the leaders. The leaders are of various levels, and the level is indicated by the number of stars on the counters. The more stars you have, the higher the rank, and the more powerful the leader, the more capabilities the leader has. Some leaders are cautious, as you can see by the movement factor indicated in a red box, and that means that it takes extra actions for them to move in the zone of influence of enemy units. The other two factors are attack and defense factor, respectively. So a military unit or military group in practice will look like something like this, with a stack of strength points and a leader on top. It is also possible for a leader to have subordinates. For example, there's a 3-star, and then there could be a 2-star there. It is also possible for small stacks not to have a leader, in which case it is implied that there is an implicit 1-star level leader with that. This is the basic concepts. Now, as for turns, the structure of a turn. Each turn, well, this is a long conflict, so each turn you have to take a little bit of time to manage the political situation, the economic situation. First, each turn, the Union player will receive a fixed number of resources, of strength points, reinforcements. That's, all the advantage that the North gets from being an economic behemoth when compared to the South. For the South, things are a little trickier because, the South does get to upgrade a resource hex each turn by building an arsenal. So you will get a marker such as this one, which you can add to a resource hex to upgrade the resource hex. And that simply will indicate now new build point that you have. Because after you get an upgrade in your resources, you have to determine the number of strength points or reinforcements that you get based on the number of resource points that you have, or build points that you have. And these that you see on the map are resources, again, build points. The number indicates how many you have. You don't need to tally a total every time. Simply there is a marker at the beginning of the game, you set it so you know the total. Each time that the Union takes a build point from you, then you simply remove it from the total. So at the beginning of each turn, you know immediately how many points you have. And I was talking about destroying build points because that is precisely what the North is after. There's a war of attrition, so the North will try to burn down, to destroy build points, and that earns victory points to the Union player, and the South is trying to rebuild them, to recapture them, to try to stay in the fight for as long as possible. So at the beginning of a turn, you took into account the build points. The other factors you take into account, for example, blockade runners and things of that kind, and you determine the number of reinforcements that the Confederate player receives. Then you have, you have the main part of the turn. Now, the turn is divided, each main turn is divided in 4 action cycles, or we should say that each season is divided in 4 turns. The terminology is not that important. You'll have a marker here to indicate in which action cycle we are. At the beginning of each action cycle, or we could call it the beginning of each main turn, as opposed to a season. At the beginning of each action cycle, both players roll a d6 and they compare the results. Here, for example, the Union is 1 point higher than the Confederate player. Here you have a track where you will place a marker to record the differential. In this case, the differential will be 1. To make things simpler, let's say the differential is 4. The Confederate rolls 4, so the differential is 2. You place a marker there. The differential represents the number of action points that both players have. That is, the player who had the highest result will upgrade first, and in this example will receive 2 action points to spend to, perform actions, and that the player will go next and will receive the same number of points. So both players in this case have 2 action points, Union player going first. When they have resolved their actions, then you go to the next action cycle, which will start with the two players rolling again to determine the order in which they resolve the actions and the number of action points. As you can see, there are a couple of special cases based on several types of differential. If there's a huge differential, like 4 or 5, then the union player needs to move south, needs to go after a target, like an arsenal, go after an objective, or if nothing else, after an army. The north needs to attack, to push south. Because of political pressures, you need to always be, to show your fellow countrymen that you're busy and you're attacking the rebels. If there is a single point of differential, that technically would be a single point that each player has. That would make that action cycle not that interesting. So this has been corrected by assigning a differential of 1, a special function. That is, when you have a differential of 1, then each player, when activating, will receive an action point per theater. Remember, there are 3 theaters, Trans-Mississippi, West, and East, so that means 3 action points, but they need to be spent in specific locations. With a 0, you don't actually need to resolve anything just yet. It simply means that each player will receive a special card. There's a game that is not card driven, but it's card enhanced, and cards represent unpredictable resources that you will accrue during the game. You will receive some at the beginning of the game, and then you get more in various phases of the game, including this one, and you cannot have more than 5. Now these cards, they're small. They're smaller than your average card, but they're so cute. Oh my gosh, so cute. They may represent special actions that you may perform, or they may simply indicate areas where you can perform a special action. That is, these are extremely generic, extremely flexible resources. You may spend a card to get a bunch of stuff, including special actions that will take place in the area indicated there. Just to give an example, there's a good list of special actions that may be triggered by special cards, but the most common ones really are to get an extra activation, that is to get an extra action point, and that you would get by burning a special card, or get a modifier in battle. And those, or also something pretty common to do is to build forts. Building forts, forts are good resources, are good defensive resources, but you need special cards to be able to build them. So this is the general idea. So you can see a lot of flexibility here. Oh, and there's a tie, so each player gets a card, and then simply you reroll. And you may happen any number of times until there is a differential, and then boom, the action cycle starts with the players resolving their actions. So between action play, special actions that you do not know when they'll come, how many you will have, or you'll be able to spend them, but there are a lot of those that you can choose to trigger. Between that and such flexibility during your turn, this is just a game with a scary number of options to explore. So you do have your actions that you received from the differential, and now it is time to start spending them. A basic action that you will be performing a lot when things start getting hot is to move. That is, you activate a stack of units, a military unit, to move it on the board. Moving, a unit will move based on the movement factor of the leader that is leading the unit. If there are several ones, it is the leader that is the highest in rank, and simply you spend movement points depending on the terrain that you are traveling through, the exits that you are crossing. Nothing too special there. However, nothing special in the terrain. You move and you spend points. But there are a couple of interesting things here about movement. One is, for example, that as you move, as a leader moves, the leader can suck in strength points from adjacent hexes. It's called regrouping. I really like the fact that you spend extra movement points, and by doing so, you're able to put together in a higher stacks strength points that are adjacent to the place in which you're moving. So if I'm moving there, I would be able to get a point from there and a point from there, but it does cost me extra strength points. You can also, extra movement points. You can also spend movement points to entrench, and so that can be part of a movement. You move a little, and then you entrench. But actually, since we're talking about movement, there are two other interesting things that have to do with movement, and they're reaction movement. And this reminds me of For the People that has similar ideas. Here you have an interception movement. It is when a unit moves in the zone of influence of another one, and the zone of influence is projected by units around in the axis around them with limitations based on terrain. Well, then the unit that was just reached by another one that became adjacent, the unit that is not active and was reached by another one can react by intercepting the unit. You need to pass a test. You roll 2 dice, you apply modifiers based on various conditions and things that may apply, and if the modified total is 9 or higher, then you've been able to successfully intercept the opponent. You move in the axe of the opponent and you trigger a battle immediately. You may also use another type of movement to avoid the battle. The opponent is starting a battle with you, then you try reaction movement. You again roll 2 dice, again apply modifiers, and again if the total is 9 or higher, you will move away. Maybe the opponent then will keep moving and try to catch you, and then you can try avoiding the battle again. You can do that any number of turns, any number of times, as long as the opponent is trying to start a battle with you. So you do that until either the opponent gives up or you fail a roll and the opponent catches with you and starts a battle. You may use actions, and we're still talking about regular actions. You can use regular actions, so as we said, to move or to rally in case you have units that are demoralized because of an effect of combat. You may entrench, so you build fortifications that will be useful later in battle. In defense, of course, you may do training. Training doesn't have any immediate action. You simply use a track to record the number of training points that you have gathered, and every 10 points of training, I should say, so every 10 regular actions that you're spending in training, then you get an extra strength point, hooray, in your army. Things like that. Now, we talked about the special actions given by the cards, the regular actions given simply by the dice differential, and now I'm sure you all want to know about battle, because this is a war game after all, and we all love to know how battle is resolved. Now, it's pretty straightforward. Let me just preface by saying it's one of those combat systems where both players will roll, both players will inflict damage on the opponent, which is always interesting, so the defender gets something to do. Hooray. So you simply look, suppose that there is a battle between these two groups, you look at the number of strength points that the two players have, and then you check that on this combat table. Now it looks like this is 3 combat tables, but in reality it is a single one. It's simply broken in 2 because various factors change based on the number of strength points. This is the first line you're looking at. The number of strength points determines the column on this tripartite table. And for example, with 2, you will use this column. With 6, you will use this column. If you have 7 strength points, you use this column. As you can see, other things are altered. One is the number of dice that is rolled changes with the number of strength points that you have in a battle. And also the number of leaders that you have changes. So this is why this is divided in 3 parts, because it's one rare case actually in which there's something that also changes on this line on the combat table. Then you will roll the die. You will apply modifiers, for example, based on the defensive combat factor of the leader leading the army of the defender, the attack factor of the attacker. Terrain always works in favor of the defender. Modifiers that may come from being demoralized, or they may come from spending action cards, special action cards, When all is said and done, each player will have a column, will roll a die, will apply possible modifiers, and will get a result. If there is a number, that is simply the number of damage points that you inflict on the opponent. If you have a 1, the opponent will lose a strength point, and 2, the opponent will lose 2 points. Pretty intuitive. Now, you see little symbols there, diamonds and asterisks. If there's only a diamond or an asterisk, that means that you don't inflict any damage. But as you can see, these symbols can also be combined with numbers. What does it mean? It means that at the end of a battle, you need to determine who is the winner and who is the loser after you determine the number of damage points that have been inflicted. And in many cases, you may have a tie. So the symbols that you see here are simply used to resolve ties. If there is a number with a symbol, it always wins against a number without the symbol, no matter the symbol. So a diamond, a 1 with a diamond wins against a 1. A 1 with an asterisk wins against a 1. If there are 2 numbers that both have symbols, then asterisks win over diamonds. And if you get the same exact result, same number and same symbol, then you have a tie, and it is, however, the attacker that needs to retreat. So you need to determine the winner to determine who retreats. The attacker retreats by 1x and the defender by 2. So it seems that there is an advantage in being the attacker, as you can push back the opponent more. And also, the loser of the battle becomes demoralized. And yes, units become demoralized because of combat. They also become demoralized because of heavy losses. These things will give a unit a negative modifier as long as the unit is demoralized. There are a couple of other basic rules. You have rules for supplies, of course. You need to demonstrate that your units are in supply, can trace a line of supply to a supply source, otherwise bad stuff happens. There is strategic movement that allows you to move units in particularly fast ways, using rivers, using railroads, using the ocean, things like that. And then you have advanced naval rules and optional rules, but this is the basic idea. The basic idea is really not hard, it's not too complicated. The players alternate executing actions with a lot of options and flexibility due to the dice differential and the special actions. And victory is based on victory points. You gain victory points for the Union by capturing bill points of the South. It's also possible to gain victory points by achieving particularly important objectives like taking the capital of the opponent, and then victory, as I said, is checked at the end of each turn, and it's based on victory points, which is a mix of control of territory and resources, and as I said, achieving important objectives in the overall architecture of the war. Instant classic, yes. In the introduction, I said, would this be a classic or a disaster? Come on, you in a sense, you knew it. It's one of these games that when it shows on your doorstep, there are sort of like vibrations coming out of it. There are like, you can feel the force coming out. You know it's gonna be good. You know it's gonna be exciting because a designer this well respected, a production this big is a production that the publisher really believed in. There is a slight chance that with all of these good elements, things go bad, but this is not the case. The U.S. Civil War is a classic. It's a classic already. Trust me, this is a game that 20 years from now, 30 years from now, is gonna be as respected as the Civil War is, but I should say more, because there's just an elegance to this design. There's a beauty to this design that, to me, rivals. So actually, in terms of design and elegance and beauty, I think this may simply top the other two. This may simply surpass the previous ones. Now, it really is closer to this one, and it simply does what this one does better. For the people, it's a game that not necessarily will be replaced by the U.S. Civil War because it is pretty different. It still feels different. I feel that the U.S. Civil War borrows from For the People a little less. it still offers a different, much more convoluted, much more complex, in a sense, deeper experience. But this one, oh, this one is deep enough while being absolutely user-friendly. Probably not a beginner's war game, not like your first war game, but it can be, I don't know, if we're using an academic curriculum, this is second year's class, not the introductory class, 200 level, like they divide things at IU, 100, 200, 300. Or end of the first year of your war game curriculum. Not a beginner's game, but not advanced in any sense. There are about like 20 pages of rules to play the basic game, and the advanced rules are only a couple of pages. You could have fun for years to come. There are two things in here. One is you could have fun. Oh my gosh, this game is so good because it does what wargaming is supposed to do, which is to give you these snapshots, these dynamic representations of historical events in an interactive, engaging way, which is here still accessible. It is still playable. A lot of unpredictability due to the action differential. I love that. I love that flexibility. It kind of like hardwires the fact that whatever you see on the map always needs to be seen and thought of as a slice of a much bigger, complex reality that encompasses international diplomacy, economy, politics, a lot of things. There should be unpredictable events that will affect what happens in the battlefield and on the map. And you have that sense that not knowing the order in which things will happen, having that great flexibility, having a shifting, changing, unpredictable number of actions really captures that. At the same time, you can manipulate that to an extent thanks to the cards, and I really like that. I really like that degree of intense yet controllable or influenceable randomness that still rewards good gameplay. At the same time, the random element is there. It works thematically because of the unpredictability of war, so it works thematically. It makes the game very suitable for solitaire play. Yes, there are those cards that technically you shouldn't see, you shouldn't know what the opponent has, but frankly these cards, there are many types of cards. The opponent in a two-player game has 5 cards. You can assume chances are that there will be one of them, most likely, that has to do with the East, one of them that has to do with the West. Chances are that that more or less you get a sense of what the opponent may have. Here, if you're playing solo with all the cards face up, you have a little more knowledge than you would have if you were playing against an opponent, but it's not something that really alters the experience. And the advantage of playing solo is that with something with this complexity, you can take your time, you can just sit there, you can take a break, go and read a book about the events, come back, experiment with something, rewind time to try something else. The joy of understanding, of getting such a deep set of insights about the historical events, to me is an intellectual pleasure that is enough to keep me interested even as I'm playing the game by myself. I love how the two sides play in completely different ways, as they very well should historically, with different challenges, different resources and advantages. Position for the South, huge difference in forces and resources for the North. Different areas of the map play in different ways, different factors of the war captured differently on the map. The Mississippi is this huge liability for the South, as you need to try to fortify to avoid the North being able to turn it into a highway that they can use to ship goods and troops north and south. All the way to the east, you have that challenge of Washington and Richmond being so close to each other, with the paranoia that the Union player definitely should always keep in mind, should always try to to follow. Listen to your guts and be paranoid because you really want to defend Washington. But of course, Richmond also is an important area which is so close to the opponents. So at the beginning, you're fortifying all of that area. In the middle of the map, you have a little more free area for movement, which of course can be, it's tricky because it is a large area. At the beginning, you do not have many troops, so there are many possible breaches that can be opened in the ideal hypothetical lines. There's a lot that you have to defend, or to say that you have to get in the set of mind that allows you to deal with the fact that you cannot protect all of your line. Some states at the beginning may still switch allegiance. Kentucky doesn't really know what to do yet. So there is also that political factor. Political factors are there, but again, everything is very economic, very linear, very polished. The complexity of the rules is reduced to the minimum possible, while at the same time retaining a lot of the flavor of the complexity of the historical events. So you can concentrate on strategy, you can concentrate on gameplay. You can concentrate on dealing with history rather than going through a cumbersome procedure to implement history. You can concentrate on gameplay and enjoy it to a huge degree, while at the same time, again, still retaining the history there. It feels historical. It is fun to play. I think this game is going to be really a classic in wargaming, period, and in wargaming about the American Civil War. In a sense, it also reminds me of Unconditional Surrender that came out last year, a game that was a strategic representation of the World War II. It reminds me of that because you also had there a game that is strategic, covers a huge event, and does that in a relatively economic way. And this is what the US Civil War does. It's a game that covers potentially, depending on the scenario that you're playing, the entire game, and it does that in a manageable, playable, and beautiful way. A plus, 10 to 10, highest marks from me. I loved it. I think any wargamer will love this game. This game is great, and this is a game that is going to stay. Trust me. And before we conclude our review, I simply want to thank some viewers that backed my Kickstarter campaign for 2015. The viewers I'm thanking in this video are Rodney Smith, Kimberly Orr, Dan O, and David Studley. Thank you to the 4 of you for backing my Kickstarter campaign, and thank you to all of you, my viewers, for watching my videos.